My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and it's 2024 here in Boston, Massachusetts. I never planned to take revenge on my brother. I only wanted peace, the kind that doesn't come with bitterness, only closure. But sometimes, fate has a strange sense of timing. The same man who once said I didn't deserve a single cent of our father's inheritance now lives in a house I own. Keep watching till the end, because this isn't a story about revenge. It's about rising so high that the people who buried you are forced to look up. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe. I've got more that'll keep you thinking long after the credits roll. The morning my father's will was read, Boston felt colder than usual. Not because of the wind, but because of what was about to happen inside that oak-paneled office. The lawyer's voice was steady, professional, but every word cut through me like ice. And the majority of the estate, including the family home, goes to Mr. Thomas Hayes. My brother didn't even flinch. He sat there with that smug calmness, the kind that comes from knowing you've already won. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, every second stretching longer than the last. "Is that it?" I asked quietly. The lawyer hesitated. "There's a smaller portion reserved for you, Miss Hayes, a trust fund around 10,000. 10,000. Out of everything my father built, the home, the land, the company, I got the scraps." Thomas didn't even look at me. He stood, shook the lawyer's hand, and said, "Dad always wanted the business to stay with someone who understands it." I wanted to scream, but all I did was nod, thank the lawyer, and leave. I didn't cry until I reached the car park. And even then, I didn't cry because of the money. I cried because I realized my brother had turned our father's death into his opportunity. That night, I made myself a promise. If no one was going to believe in me, I would build something that couldn't be taken away. The next few years were brutal. I worked 2 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and ate instant noodles while others dined out. I studied real estate online after midnight, learning everything about buying, selling, and flipping properties. I saved every penny, and when I finally bought my first rundown apartment block, I poured everything I had into restoring it. The first time I turned a profit, I remember sitting on the floor with a cheap bottle of wine, laughing to myself. It wasn't about money, it was about proof. Proof that I wasn't the failure my brother made me out to be. By 2022, I had my own company, Hayes & Co. Real Estate. And every time I saw my name on a contract, I thought of my father. I wondered if he'd be proud. Then, 2 years later, something strange happened. One of my agents rushed into my office holding a folder. "Eleanor, you're going to want to see this." I took the file. "What is it?" "A listing just came in. Nice property in Cambridge. Owner's name, Thomas Hayes." My breath caught. "You're joking." He shook his head. "Nope. Says here he's behind on payments. Bank's ready to move fast." I stared at the paper for a long moment, the name blurring in front of my eyes. Thomas, my brother, the one who took everything. Now his own house was on the market. Part of me wanted to laugh. The other part wanted to look away. Because in that moment, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I could walk away and never think of him again, or I could buy the very roof over his head. I closed the folder. "Make an offer," I said quietly. The next few weeks passed like a strange dream. The deal moved quickly. My company had a reputation for fast, clean purchases, and the bank was eager to close. I didn't even have to see Thomas. Everything went through legal channels. Until one morning, I got a call. "Eleanor." The voice was hesitant, older, but I recognized it instantly. "Thomas," I said. There was silence, then a small, nervous laugh. "So it's true. You're the one buying my house." "Yes." He sighed. "I didn't expect this from you." I almost smiled. Neither did I. "You really think this makes us even?" he asked. "I'm not trying to make us even," I said. "I'm just doing business." He didn't reply, but I could hear the tension in his breathing, the quiet humiliation that comes when pride finally breaks. After I hung up, I stood by my office window, watching the city. The sun was setting, throwing gold over the skyline. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the struggle, the nights I almost gave up. And now here I was, owning the house that once belonged to the brother who said I didn't deserve anything. But strangely, it didn't feel like victory. It felt peaceful. A week later, the sale went through. Thomas moved out quietly without a word. I didn't attend. I didn't need to see it. That evening, I drove past the house, my house now, and parked across the street. The curtains were drawn, the lights off. For a moment, I imagined Dad standing at the porch, smiling the way he used to. I whispered softly, "I did it, Dad. I finally built something of my own." The wind carried the words away, and for the first time in years, my heart felt light. Just as I was about to drive off, my phone buzzed. A message. From Thomas. "I hope you're happy. Maybe you were the stronger one after all." I read it twice, then smiled. Not the kind of smile that comes from revenge, the kind that comes from release. Because in the end, I didn't need him to lose for me to win. I just needed to rise. But what happened a month later proved that fate wasn't quite done with us yet. The days after the will reading felt endless. Boston was alive outside my apartment window, traffic, lights, laughter, but inside, everything was silent. I had a single envelope from the lawyer with my name on it, and inside it $10,000. I placed it on the table and stared at it for hours. That was all I had from my father's life. It wasn't grief anymore, it was humiliation. For days, I stayed home. I didn't answer calls, didn't eat properly. The world didn't stop, but I did. It's strange how betrayal doesn't hurt immediately. It settles in like a slow poison, spreading through your chest until you start to hate breathing. Then one night, I woke up around 3 a.m., sweating. My father's voice echoed in my head, "Eleanor, whatever you build, build it with integrity." I sat up, turned on the lamp, and looked around the empty room. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. If my brother wanted to take everything our father left behind, I'd build something greater, something he could never touch. The next morning, I printed a list of real estate training courses and circled the cheapest one. I walked to a cafe, ordered black coffee, and started studying. People around me talked about movies, dates, and weekends. I just highlighted words I didn't understand: equity, leaseback, foreclosure. At night, I worked at a small property management firm as an assistant. It wasn't glamorous. I was mostly making coffee, filing papers, and answering phones, but I listened. Every conversation between brokers, every deal that fell through, every argument about price, I soaked it in like oxygen. One day, the senior agent, Mr. Dalton, noticed me taking notes during a meeting. He smiled. "You planning to take my job someday, Eleanor?" I looked up nervously. "Not yours, sir, just trying to learn." He laughed. "Good, keep learning. This business rewards patience." Patience. I repeated the word in my mind every night when I counted coins for rent. 6 months later, I used what little I'd saved, plus the last of that inheritance, to buy my first tiny property, a rundown single-room flat in East Boston. The ceiling leaked, the walls smelled like mildew, and the neighbors warned me it was a lost cause. But I saw potential. I painted the walls myself, patched the cracks, and cleaned until my hands blistered. It wasn't perfect, but when a student rented it 2 weeks later, I made my first profit, just a few $100s. Still, I cried that night, not out of sadness, but out of relief. It was the first time something had gone right since Dad died. Years passed, one property at a time. I'd wake before sunrise, visit sites, talk to contractors, negotiate with sellers who underestimated me because I was too young or too polite. I learned how to be firm without losing grace. The first time I bought a building worth $1 million, I didn't celebrate. I just sat on the balcony with coffee, watching the city lights shimmer over the Charles River, and whispered, "I did it, Dad." But even as my business grew, part of me stayed haunted. Every time someone mentioned family, I changed the topic. Every time I passed the old family home, my chest tightened. Thomas lived there. the same house that once echoed with our childhood laughter. He never called, not once in 5 years. And maybe that was for the best. Then one day, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Eleanor, this is Anna, Thomas's wife. Could you call me?" For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. I hadn't spoken to either of them since the funeral. I hesitated, then called back. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. "Eleanor, hi. I hope it's okay to reach out. I just wanted to say congratulations. I saw your company in the papers." "Thank you," I said cautiously. "How's Thomas?" A pause, then softly. "He's fine, just going through a rough patch. Work, been difficult." "Rough patch," I repeated. "He runs Dad's old firm, doesn't he?" "Yes," she said. "But he's made a few bad decisions. We're trying to manage things." I felt nothing. No anger, no joy, just emptiness. We spoke politely for another minute before hanging up. But after the call, I couldn't stop thinking about her voice, the quiet strain in it. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the skyline. Part of me whispered, he's getting what he deserves. But another part, the one that still remembered us as children, building pillow forts and stealing cookies, whispered something else. What if he's already lost more than you think? 3 months later, everything changed. I was at the office, signing contracts, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Eleanor, there's something you should see." He placed a folder on my desk, fresh listing papers. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was the address. And my blood ran cold. 118 Rosemont Avenue. Our old family home. Thomas's house. My assistant kept talking. "It's listed under foreclosure. Apparently the owner defaulted on payments for almost a year, banks looking for a quick buyer." His voice faded as I stared at the photographs inside. The porch we used to sit on in summer, the old swing Dad hung for us, the oak tree outside the window still standing. I couldn't breathe. It was as if every memory I'd buried had come alive on glossy paper. "Do you want me to ignore this one?" he asked softly. I closed the folder, my hand trembling slightly. "No," I whispered. "I'll handle it personally." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas's face, the day of the will, the smug look that burned into my memory. But now, for the first time, I didn't feel rage. I felt power, not the cruel kind, the kind that comes from surviving everything they thought would destroy you. I walked to the window, looked at the city lights, and whispered to myself, maybe this is how the universe balances things. Because 5 years ago, he took away my inheritance. Now, fate was handing me the key to the house he called his kingdom. And I wasn't sure whether to smile or to cry. Boston had a way of reminding you how small you once were. The same streets where I once walked in borrowed coats now carried my company's banners. Hayes & Co. shimmered on a dozen glass doors, a name that once meant nothing, now spoken with respect. But success isn't a sunrise. It doesn't happen in a moment. It creeps in quietly through sleepless nights, bad deals, and silent victories no one sees. I still remembered my first office, a tiny corner above a bakery in South Boston. The smell of bread filled the room every morning, and my desk was an old door laid across 2 crates. My team was a single intern who quit after 3 weeks. But even then, I told myself, one day, this name will mean something. And slowly it did. Every property I flipped carried a piece of me, the stubbornness, the pain, the hunger to prove I could build something from ashes. I didn't chase luxury. I chased stability, something that couldn't be stolen. One crisp winter morning, while reviewing contracts, my assistant burst into the room. "Eleanor, you've got a visitor," says his name's Mr. Graham. I frowned. "The investor." He nodded. Mr. Graham was the kind of man who could make or break half the city's real estate dreams. He'd seen my work online, modest, efficient, clean results, and wanted to meet the woman behind the numbers. He entered with a slow, confident stride, his gray coat dusted with snow. So, he said, looking around, this is the empire. I smiled faintly. Every empire starts somewhere. He chuckled, taking a seat. I like that answer. Most young brokers talk big, but you sound like someone who's bled for every inch. I have, I said softly. He studied me for a moment, then leaned forward. You've got something rare, grit and grace. I'm expanding my firm into mixed-use developments. If you can manage my next project, I'll give you full oversight. I blinked. Full oversight, that's big, he finished. Yes, it is, but I think you can handle it. It took me 3 seconds to decide. I'll do it. That project changed everything. It wasn't easy, nothing worthwhile ever is. There were sleepless nights, contractors who walked off, storms that ruined half the work. But when it finally finished, a sleek, modern apartment complex overlooking the river, I stood on the balcony and watched the reflection of the lights dance on the water. That was the first time I allowed myself to feel proud. Not revenge, not validation, just pride, quiet, steady, earned. But success has a cost. It doesn't take your money, it takes your peace. I was working 14-hour days, skipping meals, living on caffeine and determination. I told myself it was temporary, but it was. My life became a cycle of deals, deadlines, and documents. One evening, as I was leaving the office, a familiar voice called out behind me. Still working this late? I turned. It was Anna, my brother's wife. I hadn't seen her since that one awkward phone call years ago. She looked thinner, older, but her eyes still kind. I was nearby, she said, forcing a small smile. Thought I'd stop in. I hope that's okay. Of course, I said, trying to hide my surprise. How's Thomas? Her smile faltered. He's managing, barely. The firm isn't what it used to be. I hesitated. I heard. She nodded, her gaze lowering. He never admitted it, but losing the company contracts, it broke him a little. I think he regrets how things ended with you. I didn't know what to say. For years, I had imagined hearing those words and feeling triumphant. But standing there, looking at her tired eyes, I felt nothing but pity. I don't hate him, I said finally. I just stopped needing him. She looked at me, surprised. You sound like your father. The mention of Dad's name sent a ripple through my chest. Anna reached into her bag and pulled out a small, weathered envelope. Thomas asked me to give you this, if I ever saw you again. Said it's something from your father's old office. I took it carefully. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting familiar, my father's. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Thank you, I whispered. She smiled sadly and left. I sat in my car for a long time, just staring at that envelope. I didn't open it, not yet. Some truths, I told myself, have to wait until you're strong enough to hear them. That night, I looked out at the city skyline, my city now, and thought of everything that had happened. I had power, money, respect. But somewhere beneath it all was the same girl who once walked away from a lawyer's office with a broken heart and $10,000. And maybe I wasn't done walking her story yet. Because the universe wasn't finished weaving its threads. Not when the house that started it all was still standing, waiting, a few miles away. And soon, I'd come face to face with it again. The air in Eleanor's office was crisp and alive with the sound of success. Ringing phones, clattering keyboards, the low hum of ambition. The glass walls glowed with morning light, catching reflections of her team, people who trusted her, who believed in her leadership. It had been 5 years since she'd started Hayes Real Estate, and in that time she had turned a small, borrowed space into one of Boston's fastest-growing firms. But success came at a cost. Late nights, missed birthdays, a loneliness that clung to her like a shadow. Still, every achievement, every signature, every deal reminded her that she didn't need her brother's approval anymore. She was meeting a client when her assistant knocked gently on the door. Eleanor, I think you'll want to see this, she said, holding out a tablet. Eleanor glanced at the screen, distracted, until her eyes froze on the headline. Historic family home in Beacon Hill listed for sale. Her heart skipped. Beacon Hill, the house where she'd grown up. The house her father built with his own hands. The house Michael had stolen from her. For a moment, the room faded. She could still see the front porch, her mother's roses by the gate, her father's laughter echoing through the hall. The last time she'd stood there, Michael had been standing on those same steps, smirking as the lawyer read the will. "Guess you'll have to find your own place, Ellie. Don't worry, I'll take care of the house." She remembered how the words burned, how she'd packed her things in silence, leaving behind not just a home, but a piece of herself. Now, 5 years later, that same house was up for sale. Her assistant spoke softly. "Should I mark it as interested for another client?" Eleanor took a breath, her eyes sharp, steady. "No," she said. "Schedule a private viewing for me." That evening, as the city lights shimmered across the Charles River, Eleanor sat in her car outside the house. It looked almost the same, the white shutters, the old oak tree, the brass knocker shaped like a lion. But it felt different now. Smaller, older. The power it once had over her was gone. She stepped out slowly, heels clicking against the pavement, heart steady. When the real estate agent arrived, she greeted Eleanor warmly. "It's a lovely property," she said, unlocking the door. "Though I hear the owners had some financial trouble." Eleanor's lips curved slightly. "Has he now?" The agent didn't notice the flicker in her tone. She just smiled and pushed open the door. "Let's take a look." Inside, the house smelled faintly of dust and memories. The living room still had the same fireplace where their father used to sit with a book. The same staircase where Eleanor and Michael used to race to the top. She touched the banister, smooth, familiar, and for a moment she felt that little girl again, running barefoot through these halls. But then she remembered how she'd left. The humiliation, the betrayal, and the strength it took to rebuild her life from nothing. She turned to the agent. "What's the asking price?" The agent flipped through her notes. "Given the condition, the seller, looking for a quick sale. It's surprisingly low for this area." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Perfect." The next morning, Eleanor walked into the bank. The deal was already moving fast. Her company had more than enough liquidity to buy the property outright. The banker looked at her with quiet admiration. "You're buying your childhood home." Eleanor nodded, her tone calm but purposeful. "Yes, I think it's time it came back to the right hands." By afternoon, the papers were signed. The property was hers, just like that. But she didn't rush to move in or change anything. She sat in the empty living room that night, alone with the quiet. She wasn't thinking of revenge, not anymore. It wasn't about hurting Michael. It was about reclaiming what was taken from her, her peace, her story, her place in the world. When the doorbell rang, she knew who it was before she opened it. Michael stood there, disbelief written all over his face. "You," he said, voice breaking with a mixture of anger and confusion. "You bought the house." Eleanor leaned against the doorframe, composed, almost serene. "Looks that way." He laughed bitterly. "You think this makes you better than me?" She met his eyes, not with hate, but with something deeper. Understanding. "No, Michael," she said softly. "It just means I finally stopped trying to prove it." He stood there, speechless, as she turned and walked back into the house. Outside, the evening wind rustled through the old oak tree, scattering a few golden leaves across the porch, like quiet applause for a woman who had finally, gracefully, taken back what was hers. The following weeks moved like slow thunder, calm on the surface, but full of quiet power underneath. The news of Eleanor buying her brother's house spread fast through their old social circle. To some, it was poetic justice. To others, it was scandal. But Eleanor didn't care about whispers anymore. She had spent years being underestimated. Now, the silence around her spoke louder than any explanation. Michael, on the other hand, was unraveling. The man who once walked through life with smug confidence now stumbled under the weight of bad decisions. His real estate ventures had collapsed. His marriage had fractured. And now, the one symbol of his pride, their father's house, no longer belonged to him. He showed up at Eleanor's office one morning, unannounced. "Eleanor," the receptionist said nervously, "your brother here." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Send him in." Michael entered, trying to mask the desperation in his voice. His one-tailored suit looked worn, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. "So," he said with forced calm, "you really went through with it." Eleanor gestured for him to sit. "I don't remember asking for your opinion." He sat down anyway. "You think this fixes something, that buying the house erases the past?" She leaned back in her chair. "No, Michael, it doesn't erase the past. It just reminds me that I survived it." For a moment, he was silent. Then his tone changed, pleading, almost broken. "I'm in trouble, Eleanor. I need help. Investors are backing out, the banks are calling, and I might lose everything." Eleanor studied him. The same brother who had mocked her dreams, who'd thrown her out of their father's house like a stranger, now sat across from her asking for mercy. "Do you remember what you told me?" she asked quietly. "When Dad died, and I begged you for a fair share, you said, 'The world doesn't owe you anything.'" Michael swallowed hard. "That was different. I was angry, grieving." "No," she interrupted softly. "You were greedy." He flinched. The truth hit like a slap. Eleanor stood, walking to the window. Outside, Boston's skyline gleamed, towers of glass and light that reflected everything she'd built with her own hands. She turned back to him. "You know what's ironic? You taught me exactly how to survive without you." Michael stared at her, eyes wide with something between shame and disbelief. "So, you're not going to help?" Eleanor walked to her desk and slid a check across the table, not large enough to save him, but enough to give him a chance to stand. "This isn't charity," she said. "It's closure. Pay off a few debts, start over. But after this, we're done. No more calls, no more guilt, just peace." He picked up the check, staring at it as if it burned his fingers. "Why would you do this?" "Because," she said, her voice steady, "revenge ends where dignity begins." Michael looked at her, speechless. For the first time, the arrogance in his eyes was gone. There was only regret. He stood slowly. "You've changed." Eleanor smiled faintly. "No, Michael, I just finally became who I was supposed to be." After he left, Eleanor sat alone for a while, letting the weight of the moment settle. The office hummed quietly around her, phones ringing, printers whirring, but her mind drifted back to that old house. She had bought it to reclaim her power, but now it represented something else. Peace after war. A reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal if you stopped picking at them. That weekend, she returned to the Beacon Hill house again, not as a conqueror, but as a daughter. She walked through each room slowly, touching the old walls, feeling the memories breathe around her. In her father's study, she opened a drawer and found something she hadn't expected, an old family photograph. Her father, her mother, Michael, and her, all smiling, back when love hadn't been divided by greed. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. For all the anger, for all the pain, she still missed them, missed the family they once were. She placed the photo back in the drawer and whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for teaching me how to build even after being broken." Outside, the afternoon sun poured through the window, casting a warm glow over the room. It felt like the house itself was forgiving her for staying away so long. As she stepped onto the porch, she looked up at the oak tree, older now but still strong, just like her. And for the first time in years, Eleanor smiled, not because she'd won, but because she'd finally let go. The days that followed blurred into quiet reflection. Buying the house, facing Michael, it all felt like closing a book she'd carried for too long. But some stories didn't end with a signature or a sold sign. They lingered, whispering through memories, waiting for their real ending. Eleanor spent the next week overseeing the restoration of the Beacon Hill house. Every creak of the old wooden floors, every faded wall she repainted, felt like stitching an old wound. She didn't change much, just polished what had been left to decay, the way her father would have wanted it. One evening, as she was inspecting the backyard, her project manager approached her. "Ms. Hayes, there's someone asking to see you," he said, hesitant. "Who is it?" "He says his name's Michael Hayes." Eleanor's breath caught for a second. "Send him through." Michael looked worse than before. His suit jacket was missing, his tie hung loose, and exhaustion carved lines around his eyes. He stood at the back gate, staring at the house like a ghost revisiting its grave. "I didn't come to fight," he said quietly. Eleanor folded her arms. "Then why are you here?" "I just needed to see it. The house, our home." For a brief moment, she saw not the man who had betrayed her, but the boy who used to chase her through this same yard, both of them laughing while their father watched from the porch. "Come in," she said softly. They walked through the hall together, the air thick with unspoken memories. Michael brushed his hand across the wall. "I never realized how much of him still lived here." Eleanor glanced at him. "Maybe that's because you were too busy trying to own it instead of remember it." He sighed. "I know, I ruined everything." Eleanor didn't reply. The silence between them was heavier than any argument could be. They reached their father's old study, the same place where the will had been read years ago, the room that had changed everything. Michael paused at the doorway. "I can still hear his voice here. That day I thought if I had more, maybe I'd finally be enough." Eleanor frowned slightly. Enough for what? For him, for Dad. That confession caught her off guard. She turned toward him. "You think he loved me more?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. Michael gave a sad laugh. "He admired you, said you had his drive, his kindness, his clarity. I had temper and pride. I thought if I built more, owned more, I could finally be seen like you were." Eleanor felt something inside her soften. "Michael," she said gently, "he never compared us, you did." He looked down, guilt shadowing his face. "I know. I wanted control, and in the process, I lost everything that actually mattered." They stood there, two broken reflections of the same bloodline, surrounded by the quiet hum of their father's legacy. After a long silence, Eleanor spoke. "Do you remember what Dad always said about the house?" Michael nodded faintly. That it wasn't about the bricks, it was about who felt safe inside them. Eleanor smiled sadly. "You never let me feel safe, Michael." Her words weren't cruel, they were honest, and sometimes honesty hurt more than anger. He exhaled shakily. "I don't expect forgiveness, I just needed you to know I regret it all." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Regret is the beginning of change, not the end of it." They left the study together. Outside, the evening light spilled through the windows, soft and golden, coating the walls in warmth. Before leaving, Michael turned once more. "What will you do with it?" "Keep it," she said simply. "Not as revenge, as remembrance." He nodded. "Take care of it better than I did." As he walked away, Eleanor watched from the doorway. His shoulders were hunched, but his steps were lighter than before, as if he'd finally put down the burden he'd been carrying for years. When his car disappeared down the street, she whispered to herself, "Goodbye, brother." Inside, the house seemed quieter, calmer, as if it too had been waiting for that moment. Eleanor stood there until dusk settled, the golden hue fading into soft blue shadows. Later that night, she placed a small framed photo on the mantel, her father, young and smiling, with her and Michael as children. For the first time, the picture didn't sting. It simply belonged. Eleanor sat on the couch, staring at the house she had reclaimed, the life she had rebuilt, and the peace she had earned. She realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't for Michael, it was for herself. Because the past could only haunt you if you kept inviting it in. And tonight, Eleanor finally closed the door. The morning after Michael's visit felt unusually still. The kind of stillness that came before a storm. Eleanor sat in her office, the soft hum of the city outside her window barely reaching her thoughts. The deal for the Beacon Hill restoration was complete. The staff were moving on to new projects, but something inside her felt unsettled, as if the past hadn't quite finished its work. That afternoon, her assistant, Clara, walked in holding a folder. "Ms. Hayes, there's something you need to see. It's from the estate solicitor who handled your father's will years ago." Eleanor frowned. Why would he reach out now? Clara hesitated. "He didn't. The firm sent over copies of old case files for audit, and your name was flagged." Eleanor opened the folder. Inside was a faded document, her father's handwritten note, never filed with the court. The ink was faint but clear enough to read. Both my children shall inherit equally. The company shares are to be divided evenly. Property to remain in the family. Eleanor froze. The words cut through her like glass. This wasn't the will she'd been shown after his death. Her pulse quickened as she flipped through the pages, and there it was, a second version, signed by her father's lawyer but dated after his death. Someone had altered it. Someone had taken her name off part of the inheritance. Her chest tightened. "Michael," she whispered. That evening, she drove back to the house. The air outside was thick with Boston's autumn chill, leaves swirling around the cobblestone drive. The porch light flickered as she stepped inside, the weight of the revelation pressing heavy on her chest. She found Michael in the study, sitting exactly where their father used to sit. He looked up, startled, as she walked in. "Eleanor, I wasn't expecting you." She dropped the folder onto the desk. "Then I suppose you weren't expecting this either." He stared at the papers. "What's this supposed to be?" "Proof," she said coldly. "Proof that you didn't just get lucky with Dad's will. You changed it. You lied." Michael's face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" "It doesn't matter where," she replied. "What matters is why." He rubbed his forehead, packing slowly. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. After he died, I was angry, scared. The business was collapsing, debts were piling up. I thought I was protecting the family's name." Eleanor's voice trembled, a mix of fury and disbelief. "Protecting the family's name by erasing mine." He turned toward her, eyes wet. "You have no idea how much pressure there was. Everyone expected me to be like him, the perfect Hayes, the heir, the man in control. You were the golden one, everyone loved you. I was just surviving." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "You didn't survive, Michael. You consumed yourself. You took what wasn't yours and called it survival." There was silence, heavy, suffocating. The kind that fills the spaces between two people when there's nothing left to defend. Eleanor walked to the window, her reflection faint in the glass. "Do you even realize what you cost me? The years I spent thinking our father didn't believe in me. The nights I worked until dawn just to prove I was worth something." Michael's voice cracked. "I know, and I hate myself for it." She turned, eyes fierce. "No, you don't. You hate being caught." He took a step forward, desperate. "Eleanor, please." "Don't," she snapped. "You don't get to say my name like it still belongs in your mouth." Michael froze. Her tone was ice, not the rage of a sister scorned, but the calm of a woman who had outgrown her pain. Eleanor closed the folder and slid it across the desk toward him. "I could destroy you with this, take you to court, let the world see who you really are." He swallowed hard. "Then why don't you?" She paused. Then, in a voice steady as stone, she said, "Because I refuse to let you drag me back into the darkness I've already escaped." Michael's eyes widened. Confusion, guilt, and gratitude all tangled together. Eleanor stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I don't forgive you, not yet, but I also won't waste my life hating you anymore. You've done enough damage. I'll rebuild what's left of our father's truth, not through revenge, but through integrity." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The old clock in the study ticked softly, echoing the tension in the air. Finally, Eleanor picked up the old photograph from the desk, the same one she'd found days ago, and handed it to him. "Keep it. Maybe one day you'll remember who you were before greed turned you into someone else." Then she turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the wooden floor, each step sounding like the final nail in the coffin of their past. Outside, the night wind brushed against her face, cold but liberating. She looked up at the dark sky, whispering under her breath, "I won't be my brother's shadow anymore." And for the first time, she truly meant it. The following morning arrived cold and silver, the kind of Boston morning that carried the quiet ache of reflection. Eleanor barely slept. The documents from her father's estate sat on her desk, edges curled, as if even paper could feel the weight of truth. She stared at them while the city came alive outside her window, cars humming, people rushing, unaware that someone's world had quietly realigned overnight. When she finally left for work, the air bit at her cheeks. Every breath she took felt heavier, slower. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a moment, it was a battle. And right now, she was still fighting. At the office, Clara noticed her silence. "You found something last night, didn't you?" she asked softly. Eleanor nodded. "Something that should have changed everything years ago." "Are you going to report it?" Eleanor hesitated. "No, the truth's already done its damage. There's no need to make the ashes burn again." She turned back to her window. From the 14th floor, she could see the skyline glass towers shimmering under the sun. Her company, her empire, her peace. Everything she'd built had come not from inheritance, but from heartbreak. And somehow that made it purer. That evening, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. For a moment, she thought about ignoring it, but something told her to answer. "Eleanor." It was Michael. His voice was rough, brittle. "What is it?" she asked flatly. "I thought you should know. The board at my firm found out about the forged documents. Someone must have seen the file transfer. They're calling for an inquiry." Eleanor didn't speak. He continued, voice trembling. "They're freezing my assets. I could lose the company, everything." She closed her eyes. The man who once took everything from her now stood on the edge of losing it all. "Michael," she said quietly, "what did you expect me to do? Lie for you again?" "I'm not asking you to," he said quickly. "I just wanted to tell you before it became public." His voice broke. "You were right, I hate being caught, but I hate who I've become even more." There was a pause, long and aching. Then Eleanor spoke, her tone softer than she intended. "Do you remember what Dad used to say? What's taken in deceit returns in shame." Michael exhaled, shaky. "I used to think that was just one of his lectures." "So did I," she whispered, "until I lived it." She hung up before emotion could undo her resolve. That night, she drove back to Beacon Hill again, not to confront the past, but to finally understand it. The house was quiet, the moonlight spilling through the windows like a memory of gentler times. She walked into the study, where everything had started, and sat behind her father's old desk. She opened the bottom drawer, the same one where she'd found the photograph. This time, her fingers brushed against a sealed envelope hidden under a loose panel. Her heart skipped. On the front, in her father's handwriting, were the words, "For Eleanor, when truth finds you." Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter, old, creased, but full of his unmistakable handwriting. "My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, then life has unfolded in ways I feared it might. You have always been the light of this family, kind but strong, and that will make you a target of both love and envy. I trust that you'll understand when the time comes that your worth was never measured in property or paper. It was always in the way you cared, built, and forgave. If your brother fails you, remember this. The house will return to the one who can keep its peace alive. That's you, my girl. Don't destroy him, heal yourself. Love always, Dad." By the time she finished reading, her tears had blurred the ink. The letter wasn't an answer, it was a release. Eleanor leaned back, pressing the note against her chest. Her father had known. He had seen the storm coming and left her a compass not to punish, but to guide her back to herself. The next morning, Eleanor sent an anonymous envelope to Michael's lawyer, copies of both wills, the letter from their father, and a single note. "Let the truth speak. I already have." Then she closed her laptop and took a deep breath. The city outside glowed with sunrise, golden, forgiving, infinite. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt light. No bitterness, no need for revenge, just the quiet satisfaction of a heart finally free. She whispered, "You were right, Dad. The house is at peace again." And as she walked out the front door, the soft wind through the oak trees almost sounded like a whisper in reply. The winter sun had begun to fade early that evening, painting the sky in a dull orange that melted into gray. Lydia sat in her office, her pen resting motionless against a blank sheet of paper. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like a mirror, forcing her to face the echoes she'd tried so hard to bury. Ever since the merger, the company had been a storm of movement, employees shifting roles, new clients arriving, old habits breaking. Yet despite the chaos outside her office door, Lydia's mind was stuck in one loop, Evan's words. You think power means you've won, Lydia. You're just scared to feel anything real. She'd brushed him off that day, pretending his words were nothing more than bitterness from a man who'd lost. But in truth, they had dug into her deeper than she cared to admit. When the door opened, it was Evan who entered. It was Zoe, her assistant, holding a small brown envelope. Miss Cross, this came in earlier. It's marked private. Lydia nodded, taking it without a word. After Zoe left, she carefully tore the flap open. Inside were photographs, black and white, old, faded. One of her as a child, standing in front of her father's hardware store. Another of her and her brother, laughing with faces smudged in paint. And at the bottom, a note handwritten. For when you forget where you came from. Lydia's throat tightened. She didn't need to guess who had sent it. Only one person from her past knew her handwriting that well. That night, she didn't go home. She stayed in the office until the city lights outside blurred into streaks. Her reflection on the glass window looked tired, powerful, yes, but empty. She thought about how hard she'd fought to climb, the sleepless nights, the rejections, the betrayal. She had built walls around her heart brick by brick, and those walls had kept her safe, but also alone. The next morning, Evan didn't show up for work. When she asked HR, they said he'd requested a few days off. Lydia didn't question it, but a part of her wondered, was he quitting, or was he testing her? Later that afternoon, during a board meeting, one of the directors mentioned Evan's presentation idea from last week, a restructuring plan that Lydia had rejected immediately. But now, the board wanted to revisit it. His plan actually makes sense, one of them said. If we implement it, the company could save millions next quarter. Lydia felt her jaw tighten. His plan, she had dismissed it because it had come from him, not because it lacked merit. For the first time, she realized how personal she'd made this war. After the meeting, she went back to her office and stared at the same old photographs again. She thought about her father, how he had lost his store when the bigger chains moved in. How Lydia had promised herself she'd never be that powerless again. That night, she drove to the edge of the city, to the old part of town where she grew up. The streets were quieter now, the stores smaller. The place felt smaller, too. As she parked in front of what used to be her father's store, now a dusty repair shop, she noticed a figure standing by the corner, lighting a cigarette. Evan. He looked up when he saw her, his expression unreadable. Didn't think you'd actually come. Lydia crossed her arms, the cold wind tugging at her coat. You sent the photos. He nodded. Thought you might need a reminder. You've been fighting everyone, Lydia, even the people trying to help you. She stayed silent, her breath misting in the air. You built something incredible, he continued. But somewhere along the way, you started treating people like pieces on a board. You forgot what it felt like to believe in people. Belief doesn't pay the bills, Lydia said softly. Maybe not, Evan replied, but it's the only thing that makes it worth earning them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind carried the faint hum of a passing train in the distance. Lydia's eyes went back to the shop's dusty windows, her childhood reflected there, distant but still alive. Evan flicked away his cigarette and started to walk past her, but she stopped him. Evan. He turned. Don't quit. His gaze softened, a mix of surprise and confusion. I'm not asking you to stay because I need you, she said quietly. I'm asking because maybe I need to learn how to trust again. For the first time in a long while, Lydia saw him smile, not out of victory, but understanding. As she drove back, the city lights no longer looked cold. For the first time, the walls she'd built around herself didn't feel so strong. They felt ready to fall. The next few days passed in a quiet blur. Lydia went to work as usual, but something inside her had shifted. She no longer walked through the office with the same cold precision that once defined her. She listened, really listened, when people spoke. Her employees, once cautious around her, began to notice the change, even if they didn't fully understand it. Evan had returned to work, and though their conversations were short, there was an unspoken understanding between them. He no longer looked at her with resentment, and she no longer saw him as a threat. There was, instead, a quiet mutual respect. But peace, as Lydia had learned in life, never lasted long. That Thursday morning, Zoe rushed into her office, her face pale. "Miss Cross, you need to see this," she said, placing a tablet on the desk. On the screen was a headline from a business news site. "Cross Industries accused of data manipulation. Internal whistleblower leaks evidence." Lydia froze. The article detailed confidential documents, signed under her authority, showing manipulated figures from a past contract, something that could destroy the company's reputation overnight. Her first reaction was disbelief. This can't be real. But when she opened the attached files, her signature was there. Every page, every deal. Her pulse quickened. Who had access to these archives? She demanded. "Only senior management," Zoe said carefully. "You, the finance team, and—" "Evan," Lydia finished quietly. For a moment, the room felt smaller. The faint hum of the city outside was drowned by the rush of her own heartbeat. By noon, the entire office was buzzing with tension. News vans lined the street outside. Investors were calling, demanding explanations. Lydia stayed in her office, her phone buzzing endlessly on the desk. Her eyes were fixed on the window. The same skyline she'd once looked at with pride now felt like a cage. Evan knocked lightly before entering. He looked calm, too calm. "So it's you," she said bitterly. "Me," he frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play innocent, Evan. You're the only one who could have leaked those files. You wanted to make me pay, well, congratulations." He took a step closer, confusion flashing across his face. "Lydia, I didn't." "Save it." She snapped. "You said I'd forgotten where I came from. Is this your idea of teaching me a lesson?" Evan's expression hardened. "You really think I'd do that, after everything we've been through?" But Lydia wasn't listening anymore. The pressure, the fear, the betrayal, it all came crashing down like a wave she couldn't hold back. "I built this company from nothing," she shouted. "Every sleepless night, every decision, every scar, and now it's all falling apart because someone wanted to play the hero." Her voice broke on the last word. Evan stood silent for a moment, then quietly said, "Maybe it's not falling apart, Lydia. Maybe it's just showing you what's real." He left the room without another word. That night, Lydia didn't go home again. She sat in her office, surrounded by silence and the faint glow of city lights. Her mind kept replaying every moment, every choice she had made in pursuit of success. How many people had she pushed aside? How many lies had she ignored just to stay on top? Around midnight, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You're looking in the wrong direction. The truth isn't in Evan's hands, it's in your boardroom." Her breath caught. The message was followed by an attached document, one of the leaked files, but this time with metadata showing the true uploader. Charles Denton, her oldest board member. Charles had been her father's business partner once. He'd guided her in the early years, taught her how to survive the corporate jungle. But he had also been the one to pressure her into shady deals, temporary fixes, he used to call them. Lydia's anger slowly turned to realization. She had been used. The same man who once promised to protect her legacy had just tried to destroy it. The next morning, she walked into the boardroom with the evidence in hand. The directors looked uneasy. They had all seen the headlines. "Before we begin," Lydia said, her voice steady, "I think it's time we talk about loyalty." Charles shifted in his seat. "Lydia, this isn't the time for dramatics." "Oh, it's exactly the time," she interrupted, placing the printed documents in front of him. "You leaked the data, Charles. You forged the trail to my name, and you nearly succeeded." The room went dead silent. For a second, Charles tried to laugh it off, but when she projected the metadata on the screen, undeniable proof, his smirk faded. "I built this company with honesty," Lydia continued, her voice trembling but strong. "I lost myself once trying to protect it, but not this time. I won't be your puppet anymore." Charles stood up angrily, muttering something about ungrateful children. but security was already at the door. As they escorted him out, Lydia finally let out a shaky breath. The storm had passed, or maybe it was still brewing. When she turned, Evan was standing in the doorway. "Guess I owe you an apology," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, you just needed to see who your real enemy was." For the first time in years, Lydia smiled, not a corporate smile, but something real, something human. The walls she'd built were gone, and in their place stood something stronger, clarity. The storm had finally passed, at least, that's what everyone said. The news cycle had moved on, the company's stock had begun to stabilize, and the investors were reassured by Lydia's swift action against Charles Denton. But inside her, the silence that followed wasn't peace, it was emptiness. Weeks had gone by since that explosive boardroom meeting. Lydia came to the office every morning, but her movements were slower now, more deliberate. Gone was the rush, the endless pursuit of being first, of being perfect. She started spending more time in the design floor, walking through the cubicles, talking to the people she'd once barely noticed. One afternoon, she stood by the window in her office, the city stretching beneath her, the same skyline she used to stare at with pride. But today, she felt something different. The view no longer looked like a trophy, it looked like a reminder of everything she'd lost to become what she was. Her phone buzzed, a message from Evan. "Coffee, downstairs, you could use a break." She hesitated, then smiled faintly. She picked up her coat and made her way to the cafe across the street. Evan was already there, sitting at their usual corner table, sipping black coffee. He looked different, relaxed, lighter somehow. "Didn't expect you to actually show up," he said, half teasing. Lydia sat down opposite him. "Neither did I." They both laughed quietly. For a moment, the tension of the past few months seemed to fade. "I heard the audit team cleared your name completely," Evan said. "They did," Lydia replied, stirring her tea slowly. "But that doesn't fix everything. There's still the damage to the company, to the people who trusted me." Evan leaned back. "You did what you had to. You faced it head-on. That's more than most would do." She looked up at him. "Do you really think that's enough?" He paused before answering. "No, but it's a start." Their eyes met, and for the first time, Lydia didn't see accusation or distance, just understanding. Later that evening, she walked through the nearly empty office alone. The faint hum of computers echoed in the background. On her desk was an old photograph, her and her father, standing in front of the first property they ever sold together. Her father's hand rested on her shoulder, pride in his eyes. She touched the frame gently. "I hope you'd still be proud of me, Dad," she whispered. Her thoughts drifted back to the beginning, the day of the funeral, the will, the arguments with her brother. That was the day everything had started to break. She had been fighting ever since, against him, against the world, against herself. Now, for the first time, she didn't feel the need to fight anymore. That night, she called a board meeting, not to announce a new project or celebrate a milestone, but to change something deeper. "I've been thinking about how we do things," she began, her voice calm but firm. "For years, we've measured success in numbers, growth, profit, dominance, but we forgot the one thing that keeps it all alive: people." Her team listened quietly. "From today, we rebuild not just the company's image, but its purpose. We'll create affordable housing initiatives, partner with community programs, and bring integrity back into real estate. No shortcuts, no lies." There was silence in the room, then slow, genuine applause. After the meeting, Zoe approached her. "You've changed, Miss Cross." Lydia smiled softly. "Maybe I just found what I'd been missing." As she walked out into the cool night air, she noticed how quiet the city sounded, no longer an echo of ambition, but a hum of possibility. She took a deep breath, letting the wind brush against her face. A message pinged on her phone again, from Evan. "Proud of you, Lydia. You turned chaos into something good." She typed back, "Thanks, Evan. Maybe I finally learned what success really means." When she looked up at the sky, the lights of the city glowed like scattered stars. For the first time in years, Lydia didn't feel small beneath them. She felt alive. There was still work to do, bridges to mend, a legacy to rebuild, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had lost almost everything that once defined her, but in return, she'd found something much rarer: clarity, humility, and peace. The world could keep its noise, its competition, its endless rush. Lydia Cross was finally home within herself. And tomorrow, she would begin again. It had been 6 months since the scandal. 6 long, cleansing months. Lydia Cross, once the woman who lived for power, now lived for peace. Her company had stabilized, rebuilt from the ground up with a new soul. The employees trusted her again, the board respected her, and the media that once doubted her now called her story a rare redemption in business. But there was one piece of her life she had yet to face, the one that started it all. Her brother. The man who once told her she didn't deserve her inheritance. The man who'd taken everything their father left behind and left her to start from scratch. She hadn't seen him in years, but fate, it seemed, had one last page to turn. That morning, she received an email from a real estate agent. Ms. Cross, the property at 14 Westbridge Lane, the one listed last month, has accepted your offer. You're now the official owner. Lydia stared at the screen for a long time. 14 Westbridge Lane. Her brother's house. The irony wasn't lost on her. Years ago, he'd bought it with her share of their father's inheritance. He'd built his life there, surrounded by luxury, pride, and all the things she once thought she wanted. Now the house was hers. She didn't buy it out of spite, at least not entirely. She bought it because it felt like closing a circle, not revenge, but release. Still, something deep inside her wanted to see it with her own eyes. The next afternoon, she drove out to Westbridge. The road wound through familiar streets, the ones they used to cycle on as children, racing past the hedges, their laughter echoing under the summer sun. The house stood exactly as she remembered, tall, elegant, but strangely tired. Paint peeling near the windows, the garden overgrown. She parked quietly at the curb. Before she could step out, the front door opened. Her brother, Henry, walked out carrying a cardboard box. He looked older, his hair thinner, his eyes shadowed. The arrogance that once defined him had faded. When he saw her, he froze. "Lydia." She stepped closer, calm and composed. "Hello, Henry." He blinked, setting the box down. "What are you doing here?" "I think the question is, what are you doing here?" she said softly. "I just bought this house." He stared at her, his mouth slightly open. "You what?" "I own it now," she said. "The sale went through this morning." Silence stretched between them, the kind of silence that carries years of words unsaid. Henry let out a faint, broken laugh. "So that's it, you finally won." Lydia looked at him, really looked. The man standing in front of her wasn't her enemy. He was just lost, tired. The weight of his own choices had already done the punishing. "I didn't buy it to win," she said quietly. "I bought it because I needed to let it go." He frowned. "You could have let go without taking my home." She smiled sadly. "It stopped being your home the day you sold it. You lost it, Henry, just like I lost everything once. The difference is I built mine back." Her words weren't cruel. They were calm, factual. Henry's eyes softened. "You always were stronger than me." Lydia shook her head. "No, I just learned the hard way what strength really means." For a moment, they both stood there, siblings who'd once shared laughter, grief, and dreams, now standing on opposite sides of time. She took a slow breath. "I'm not here to throw you out. Take your time. Finish packing. I won't step inside until you're ready to leave." He nodded, unable to speak. As she turned to leave, Henry's voice cracked behind her. "Lydia, I'm sorry for everything." She stopped but didn't turn around. The wind rustled through the garden, carrying his words with it. "I know," she said softly, "and that's enough." Later that evening, when she finally stepped into the house, it was empty. Dust lingered in the air, sunlight falling through the curtains like fatting memories. She walked through each room, the living room where they once celebrated birthdays, the hallway where her father's old painting used to hang. Every corner whispered echoes of the past. But she didn't feel bitterness anymore, only gratitude for the pain, the lessons, and the strength it gave her. In the study, she found a small drawer left open. Inside was a photo, the three of them. Her, Henry, and their father standing outside the same house. She smiled faintly and placed it on the mantel. Then she whispered, "We're all home now." That night, she sat on the back porch, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The air smelled of rain and closure. Evan called. "So," he said, his voice warm, "did you finally see it?" "I did," she replied. "And I thought I'd feel triumphant," she said after a pause. "But I didn't, I just felt free." He chuckled. "That sounds about right." They spoke for a while, about work, about life, about the new projects she'd started to help struggling families find affordable homes. When the call ended, Lydia looked up at the sky. It had started to rain, soft and slow. She let it fall on her face, cleansing, quiet, pure. She thought about her journey, from being betrayed to becoming someone who didn't need revenge to feel whole. The kind of power she had now couldn't be taken, manipulated, or stolen. It was peace. And peace, she realized, was the rarest victory of all. A few days later, the house at 14 Westbridge Lane went under renovation. Lydia didn't move in. She turned it into something else, a shelter for women starting over, just as she once had. On the plaque by the gate, a single line was engraved. "Strength isn't in taking back what was lost. It's in building something new." And as the morning sun rose over Boston, Eleanor Hayes stood by the gate, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The story that began with betrayal ended not with revenge, but with grace. And that, she thought with a smile, was the truest inheritance of all.